Welcome back, everybody, to the California Small Farm Conference, day 4 here. And today we're going to be diving into apple orchard health. Really excited to have Ellie Andrews from UC Extension here, along with some very knowledgeable apple growers who have generously offered their expertise and wisdom to share with all of you out there. So I encourage those of you watching to engage with today's workshop by chatting in our chat feature, which you'll see down below. If you have questions specifically for today's presenters, use the Q&A feature, which you'll find also there at the bottom of your screen. Drop those in there, and we'll make sure to get those answered by the end of the workshop. Today's workshop is being recorded. We're going to post this up on CAF's YouTube channel, and so you can check that out later. And with that, thank you all for being here once again, and I'm excited to learn all sorts. So, Ellie, why don't you take it away?
All right, thank you so much for the introduction, Evan. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, does that look good for everyone?
Looks great.
Thanks. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Ellie Andrews. For those of you I haven't met yet, I am the UC Cooperative Extension Specialty Crops Advisor for Sonoma, Marin, and Napa counties. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about apple orchard health. So our workshop goals here are to understand key management strategies that promote apple orchard health and to learn how these strategies apply in different orchard situations to help you think about what they could look like in your orchard. So the big picture goal here is just to gain practical, science-based knowledge to help you improve apple orchard health, longevity, yield, and resilience. So I'm going to present for about half an hour to set a foundation, and then we're going to hear from some experienced apple growers. So thanks again, guys, for joining today. Really excited to hear from some apple growers who've been doing this for a long time and really know their stuff. And also, I just want to mention, I'm going to be talking about a lot of different resources. So I'm going to share all the links that I mentioned through Sched later. So don't feel like you have to write everything down. I'll send these out after the workshop. So a quick note on cultivars. There are so many apple cultivars out there. We're not going to be going into this in a whole lot of detail just for the sake of time. This could be its own workshop. So you can check out the California Rare Fruit Growers website for more info on the incredible diversity of apple cultivars in California. And of course, this might come up later if our growers on the panel want to mention cultivars, go for it. That's a great time to do that. But I'm not going to be going into this in a lot of depth right now in my presentation. What I am going to do, though, is focus on production and management. So I'm going to be referencing the Organic Apple Production Manual through UC A&R. Here's a table of contents, and I'm really going to zoom in on orchard management and pest management because these are huge needs that I'm seeing in our region and I know are important throughout California. So the first point I feel I really need to make is that we need proactive management in apple orchards. So no management is bad management. Sometimes I hear people say, "Oh, I just let nature do its thing." But I want to just emphasize that we're part of nature and neglect actively encourages insect pests, diseases, invasive species, and these can affect your neighbor's trees too, beyond just your own orchard and even across the region. Some of these issues are pretty mobile, like codling moth. So if your trees are not thoughtfully managed, then they're going to be unhealthy, weak, stunted, highly susceptible to insect pests and diseases. They won't really be able to compete that well with weeds or vegetation for water and nutrients. And ultimately, it's going to cost you time, money, and heartache. So the good news is that people have bred apple cultivars for hundreds of years for very specific traits that are really incredible, different flavors, different colors, all kinds of really cool, interesting things. So we've been doing this for a long time. And apple trees really flourish under conditions that we create with our good management. So apple trees depend on us and our thoughtful care. And we're going to actually see a lot of great examples of this in this presentation and from growers. So what are some key management strategies that you can use to promote apple orchard health? Let's say you already planted your orchard, it's in the ground. What can you do now? So I'm going to focus on nutrient, soil, and water management, integrated pest management. I'm going to mention pruning and thinning a little bit as well. Most of this content is going to be relevant for any apple grower, but I am going to highlight organic and agroecological approaches. So to start with, nutrient management is big. So it's important to maintain enough nutrients for healthy plant functioning and good yield. So you want to get nutrient status in your orchard into a healthy range, and then replace the amount of nutrients that you remove out of the orchard at harvest and fruit, right? So every time you're harvesting apples, you're moving nutrients off your site. So you just want to make sure that you're resupplying those as needed. And if that doesn't happen, you might start seeing nutrient deficiencies. So deficiencies in plant essential nutrients reduce tree health, resilience, longevity, and yield. When they're severe, they can defoliate and kill trees. Nutrient deficiencies are often combined with low water uptake, and ultimately they make your trees less resilient to other stressors too. And here are just some examples that I'm going to go through in a little more detail. So a lot of nutrient deficiencies have kind of characteristic visual symptoms, which can be really helpful. So if you start to see symptoms like this in the bottom right corner, we have kind of brown, dry leaf edges. They're kind of dead on the edges of the leaves here. This it might be a symptom of potassium deficiency. Uh, it might also be low water uptake, and we'll see what that looks like in a little bit. Just another example, here are symptoms of calcium deficiency, which is also known as bitter pit. It kind of looks like maybe it might be a disease, but it's actually not. This is a calcium deficiency. It's often closely linked with low water uptake as well. And on the far left, we've got symptoms of nitrogen deficiency, which in most plants are just pale, uniform, yellowy leaves, right? So like they're not green enough, they're kind of pale, and they're uniform. But bear in mind, too much nitrogen can also cause problems at too much vigor. So there's a balance there. And last example here, we've got symptoms of zinc deficiency. This is also known as little leaf sometimes because it causes tiny little leaves, and it also causes a lack of leaves on your branches as well, as you can see in this photo. So those are visual symptoms that can kind of give you some clues, but how do you know for sure if your trees have nutrient deficiencies? So if you really, really want to know, you can collect leaves and send them to a lab and then get leaf tissue analysis done. And that's going to tell you the concentration of nutrients in your apple leaves. This is the most reliable direct assessment of tree nutrient status. There's a really nice resource that I'll share in later in my links list telling you how to do this. So these are the directions. It's pretty straightforward. So just briefly as an example from our area, I'm based here in the North Bay region. An apple grower noticed leaf discoloration, canopy dieback, and defoliation in his orchard. So they sent in leaf samples to a lab to compare 4 symptomatic trees that had leaves that looked like this with 1 healthy tree where the leaves looked totally normal. All symptomatic trees were severely deficient in nitrogen and potassium, whereas the healthy tree had only mild deficiencies. So now the grower is amending the soil to provide more organic nutrient inputs, and kudos to them for doing this work to figure this out and now using this information they got from their leaf tissue results to guide their input decisions. So this brings us more to nutrient management. How do we do this? There are a couple of different areas you want to focus on. So first is just source. What type of fertilizer or amendment really makes sense for you in your situation? What are you lacking? What do you need? And this could be compost, organic fertilizers, lime. There's a lot of stuff out there. Rate is just referring to how much you apply, and this is going to depend on actually a lot of factors. Your tree age, how big your tree is, cultivars, and really important, like I just mentioned, is that current nutrient status in your soil and especially in your trees. The nutrient concentration and release rate from the chosen source matters too, because different sources release nutrients at different rates. So that's a lot of things. So what you can use is your visuals that we just went through. What does vigor look like? And if you want to, you can use leaf tissue information as well. And soil tests can always provide really nice complementary information as well. How often? Really you just want to match nutrient supply with a time of nutrient uptake. That's usually going to be spring and summer. Like I mentioned, different sources might release nutrients at different rates. So just learn a bit about what source you choose. And some growers fertilize every other year or really pretty rarely. It just depends on what your orchard needs. And placement is pretty straightforward. That's just above roots within the irrigated area. So water is going to help move those nutrients into the soil where roots can take them up. You probably don't really need to use foliar sprays that often. They can be helpful in some situations, but if you're going to go that route, please be really careful not to over apply because that can cause a lot of issues. So big picture, the goals of nutrient management are just not too much, not too little, healthy trees with moderate vigor, appropriate sources, minimizing environmental impact, and being economically efficient. So what's gonna, work best for you at your site? It totally depends. A lot of apple growers don't apply that much, really only as needed. And, I know like Stan here has mentioned, it's really important to not overdo nitrogen inputs because that can cause problems. So not too little, not too much. And this brings us to soil management more broadly. So as many of you know, I'm sure, soil organic matter is super important. It is all stages of decomposing organic materials. It does a lot of amazing things, right? So it promotes water infiltration, builds soil structure, it's a reservoir for nutrients, and it promotes good soil biology. And, it's important to do whatever we can to increase soil health. And this is just the soil's ability to function and support life. And when I say function, what does that really mean? We've got three different types of functioning that soil does for us in agricultural systems. We've got soil chemistry or fertility, so that's like nutrients, pH, stuff like that. We've got the soil physical structure, which has a huge influence on how water moves through the soil, infiltration, erosion, stuff like that. And the biological functioning of the soil includes things like microbes, worms, and arthropods, and so on. So how do we increase soil organic matter and soil health? There are lots of things we can do. You don't have to do all of this, but some examples include adding organic matter amendments like compost, cover crops, and mulch, minimizing tillage when possible. I know tillage is used strategically in apple orchards a lot of the time, but not overdoing it is important. Keeping living roots in the soil, diversifying plant species. These are all ways that you can increase soil organic matter and soil health. But you can just choose the strategies that work for you. Every system, every site's unique. There's no one size fits all here. So just as a really nice example, here's Ted Richardson of Bella Ridge Orchard, who you're going to hear from soon. He uses cover crops in his orchard. So here's just one example of what that can look like. Okay, so now I'm going to get into water management. So apple trees need water to function, withstand stress, and produce fruit. So we know that drip irrigation is more efficient than micro sprinklers in general, and it also reduces canopy humidity and the risk of disease spread. So you can see what these two types of irrigation systems look like here. I know some apple growers have water access and irrigation set up, but really only use it as needed. And a lot of farmers, apple growers, dry farm, so they don't actually irrigate at all, and instead they rely on the water stored in the soil from winter rain. But regardless, it's really important to know the visual signs of tree water stress. The biggest one that I'm sure everyone's familiar with is just wilting, right? But then you might also start to see dead or brown leaf margins, bark cracking, as you can see here on the right, stunted growth, and if it's really severe, it can lead to defoliation and tree death. Severe water stress permanently damages trees, their vascular system, and it makes trees less resilient to other stressors too, like pests and sunburn. So evapotranspiration is just a big word for water that goes to the atmosphere that's transpired by the tree and also that evaporates from the soil surface. So the amount of water trees need depends on lots of things, right? So it depends on the tree size. The smaller the tree, the smaller the water demand. It depends on tree age, cultivars, spacing, soil, location, microclimate, and so on, right? So this is actually kind of a long list of things that influence how much water your tree needs. So what can you do about that? What tools can help you really understand what's going on out there? For one, we've got lots of different types of soil moisture probes out there. This is going to tell you your soil water status. It basically just answers the question, how dry is the soil? And if you really want to know how thirsty your trees are directly, the pressure chamber is the most direct measure of tree water status. And if you want to know more about climate data, we have CIMA stations all throughout California where you can go and actually find out what's going on in the atmosphere, temperature, precipitation, humidity, stuff like that. Or you could use a weather station on site, or maybe a neighbor might have one that you could use. So I want to spend a little bit more time on dry farming because in coastal California, which is where I'm located, I know a lot of apple growers, south of here too in the North Bay, throughout Santa Cruz and other regions in coastal California, a lot of apple growers dry farm. So this just means they rely on water stored in the soil from the winter rain for tree water uptake during the growing season. And some growers use dust mulching together with dry farming. So that just means surface cultivation that traps soil moisture in the soil so that the trees can access it instead of having it evaporate. Just, of course, bear in mind that if you're going to use that, there are trade-offs like, increased risk of erosion or reduced soil organic matter, that kind of thing. So there's lots of benefits and limitations to dry farming, and I'm just going to go over these briefly and would love to hear more from our grower panels later, what your thoughts are here. But the benefits of dry farming, you do reduce your water use, which is great. It can help improve weed control, fruit quality. It could open up new marketing potential, and it could help you increase productivity on land that otherwise, has limited water access, and otherwise, you might not be able to grow much there. Limitations, however, yield is probably going to be a bit lower than irrigated orchards. You might need to space your trees a little wider. And some winters it might not rain at all, which could lead to really severe water stress the next season. So overall, with water management, I'd highly suggest thinking about drought-tolerant varieties at planting. Ensure your trees get enough water to stay healthy and minimize the risk of severe water stress. Consider which tools or approaches work for you with water monitoring and understanding what's going on in your orchard. Know how to recognize visual signs of water stress, and just know you can always irrigate a little bit more than normal during heat waves. Okay, so now I'm going to move into integrated pest management, which is just combining multiple strategies to safely and effectively solve pest problems. So IPM is for everyone, it's a process you can use to solve pest problems while minimizing risk to people and the environment. And it can be used to manage all kinds of different pests anywhere, in the backyard setting, in commercial ag, in natural areas, and so on. So this is a big picture, ecosystem-oriented framework. And that's because it's flexible, you can use it in different ways to fit the needs of your specific situation. It's an ecosystem-oriented approach, and it's this toolbox approach, right? Where you have different tools in your toolbox for different situations. And you can just choose a combination of strategies that make sense for your unique context and goals. So really the question is just what tools are right for you. So with this IPM framework, we start at the bottom of this triangle here where we make sure we know who we're dealing with first. We have to identify the pest, understand its biology, and then move through different levels here. We have all kinds of different cultural control strategies, sanitation, physical or mechanical strategies, biological options, and then at the very top of this pyramid, we have chemical or pesticides, right? And I'm not saying you have to use pesticides, but this IPM framework was saying, okay, you have to start at the base of this triangle, try everything else, and then if you need them, there are chemical options. So I just want to highlight IPM does not equal pesticides. You can use IPM with or without pesticides. IPM is just this framework. And so now I'm going to get into some very specific examples in apple orchards. Unfortunately, there are a lot of pests that show up in apple orchards, and I'm just going to go through a couple of them for the sake of time. And I'm starting with codling moth because I've been told by a lot of apple growers this is the #1 pest for a lot of apple folks. So this is a really destructive insect pest. It's mottled gray or brown in color. It has kind of a tent-like wing shape. Its antennae are kind of long. It's about, 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch long. And very importantly, they have these like dark brown kind of coppery markings on their wingtips. And this is a nice characteristic that can help you identify this guy out in the field. And they cause a lot of damage. The larvae enter and damage the fruit. If you see signs like this on the outside of an apple and you cut it open, sometimes you can actually find the larva inside, or maybe they recently left. So what can you do about this? I'm going to go through some options. The first is removing host trees and abandoned orchards that are reservoirs for codling moth. This is super important. Removing fruit piles and picking bins, anywhere where they might like to hang out. Removing those from the orchard. Hand thinning as much as possible. Of course, this depends on your scale if this is feasible, but as much as you can, removing infested fruit. And of course, the big one is systematic monitoring with traps and by checking fruit. It's always great to encourage natural enemies, but of course, it probably shouldn't rely on those alone. We do have some biocontrol options out there. There's a parasitic wasp, but it can be kind of expensive. Would love to hear growers' thoughts on this one later. Codling moth, granulovirus is another option. Mating disruption tends to work best on larger scale orchards. Kale and clay is a barrier spray that kind of gums up their antenna and disorients them. It doesn't directly kill them, and it's just clay mixed with water. It's a product you can buy. And there are organic insecticide sprays out there, like different oils and spinosad. So here's a really nice example from local apple farmer here in Sonoma County, Dave Hale. I've talked to him a lot about this pest and about his strategies here, and he really emphasizes it's important to be proactive. So check your traps on a regular basis. Use your observations to guide your IPM decisions, whatever you choose to do next. So here's Dave in the orchard, checking his traps and showing me how to do this. And you can see some close-ups of what codling moth looks like. If you want a deeper dive, I have a 2-hour webinar recording on my YouTube channel, which is UCCE North Bay Specialty Crops. So this is a much deeper dive. You can also check out the UC IPM websites for gardens and for commercial ag on codling moth. So there's a lot of resources out there. Okay, I'm gonna now switch gears to fire blight. This is a destructive disease caused by bacteria. And I'm gonna go through some symptoms in a little more detail. So it causes these dead blackened blossoms, bacterial ooze out of branches and out of fruit too. And it causes like dead blackened fruit. And it causes dead shoots that kind of look like shepherd's hooks, right? So they're kind of like hooked a little bit. They're dead shoots. And a lot of the times they're on kind of like the edge of the canopy, and it gives the tree kind of a scorched appearance, which is where the name fire blight comes from. And it also causes cankers. As you can see on the left, it causes cankers. The older ones are kind of like darker in color, like black or dark brown. Whereas new cankers, if you scrape the bark away, you'll see kind of reddish, pink, or orange infected wood. So this is all caused by fire blight. Okay, so what can you do about it? We have several IPM options. Before planting, if you can, explore cultivars that are less susceptible. It's a good idea to design your orchard to promote air movement. But then after planting, it's really important to provide balanced nutrient inputs and avoid high nitrogen. Because high nitrogen is going to encourage shoot growth, and that's going to help the pathogen proliferate and spread across the tree. You can also minimize irrigation during bloom to keep humidity down, scout regularly for symptoms, and remove plants that are alternate hosts. In addition, pruning is big. So for fire blight, you want to remove infected tissue at least 8 to 12 inches below the infected area. You want to clean your shears with 10% bleach or Lysol diluted in water in the spring when the disease is active. And you want to make sure you remove all infected tissue out of the orchard. Don't leave it on the ground because that could actually continue to spread. And you do have some organic spray options out there. Copper products can provide some level of protection. Bordeaux mixture is a mixture of copper sulfate, lime, and water that can also provide some protection. I think it tends to stick a little bit better to trees in the winter, during winter rains. Would love to hear growers' thoughts on these. And then commercial growers have access to additional options, including some biologically based products. And again, the UC IPM website has you covered. We've got a fire blight page for gardens, backyard growers, and also for commercial ag as well. Okay, I have to talk about weeds briefly. So many apple growers use shallow cultivation like disking and mowing to manage weeds. Drip irrigation can help keep them down a little bit, compared to micro sprinklers. Mulches can help to some degree, and cover crops can sometimes help outcompete weeds too. And I've mentioned a lot of different products throughout this presentation. So if your orchard is certified organic, make sure you comply with USDA certified organic standards. Check the OMRI list of products that comply with the law. And you can always just check in with your certifier to make sure they're going to improve your intended product as well. And last pest I have to talk about is gophers. As I'm sure many of you are painfully aware, gophers can girdle trees. They can cause a ton of damage. And I actually get so many questions about gophers that I compiled this list of resources that I'll send out through Sched on gopher IPM. But in a nutshell, briefly, I just want to highlight systematic monitoring is really important. Look for mounds on a regular basis, especially around the edge of your orchard where they might be coming in, or areas you think they might already be. Habitat modification, you can control their preferred food sources like weeds and cover crops. There are a ton of trap options out there, so it's worth it to take the time and figure out what kind of traps work best for you. Disking can help remove burrow systems, and of course, it's always a great idea to encourage natural predators. And I'm briefly just going to go over pruning here. So we want to make sure we prune to promote good tree health, right? So you can think of this as a haircut, right? This is good for the tree. It improves tree architecture. It helps you get high quality fruit, generate new fruiting wood, and remove disease areas. So you're going to need some tools like shears, loppers, handsaw, and that sanitizer solution I mentioned earlier. And just as a really nice visual, here's the before and after of what this can look like. So we see, the little A's are a bunch of different thinning cuts. So this opens up your canopy, allows more light penetration into the canopy. And you also see this big heading cut, the B up here. And this is also known as topping. This is where you basically are helping the tree stay small and not get too big, because small trees are just going to be way easier to manage than massive trees. And a quick note on thinning, you can remove flowers or young immature fruit. This is referred to as thinning. This promotes good fruit size and reduces the strain on branches, reduces the risk of those branches snapping. Sunburn protection is a great idea. So this is going to maintain healthy bark and prevent fruit damage. You can use pruning to provide appropriate shading on your scaffold branches and your fruit. And you can use reflective sunburn barriers on the trunk and scaffolds, maybe whitewash, or maybe you could use loosely tied tree wraps. There's different options out there. You can also make sure you irrigate enough during hot weather, and that's actually going to help protect against sunburns as well. So just to summarize, usually there's a lot happening. It's usually not just one thing. So for example, let's say gophers damage the roots of your trees, then, but you don't really notice that, at first because it's underground. So what you see is reduced water, nutrient uptake symptoms, signs of water stress, deficiencies. And your tree then is, less healthy, and it has increased susceptibility to pest damage, less resilient during heat waves, and so on. So I just want to highlight, I talk about all these things separately. Usually there are a lot of things to manage out there. And, we're going to hear from some really experienced growers today. And I want to just highlight that a lot of times, different apple growers I talk to throughout my region kind of know what to do. Some of them really know what to do. Some of them are learning or pretty familiar. But a lot of times it's, the barrier is costs. It's how much this stuff costs to do, right? So like fertilizer prices have gone up a lot in the last, well, really like 10, 20 years, but especially recently, IPM products are expensive, labor is expensive for all of these different management strategies I've talked about. So really a lot of the time, the constraints and barriers around economic sustainability. And I think this is a really, really important point to make. And if you're curious about that side of things, there's a new cost and return study that came out, actually two of them, one for organic and one for conventional processing apples that came out of the Central Coast region. So this outlines a lot more information about the costs of production. So just to summarize, I've gone through a lot of stuff, but I want to share a couple more resources. I have a YouTube channel that I mentioned where, if you're really brand new to a lot of this stuff and you just want like a general introduction to fruit tree management. I have a series of videos called Fruit Tree Management on my YouTube channel. If you want deeper dives in any of these, I have a bunch of recordings on specific subjects like codling moth, fire blight, fungal pathogens that cause branch cankers, and of course, organic IPM for rodents. So there's a lot on my YouTube channel. Please feel free to check it out. So, there's really no one size fits all here when it comes to management, but there are some common needs for tree health. So ultimately, you just want to do what makes sense for your unique context, constraints, and opportunities and goals. And please, I just want to encourage everyone, reach out to other apple growers in your region and throughout California. Talk to your UC Cooperative Extension office, advisors, master gardeners. Reach out to CAF, the RCDs, NRCS, and other local orgs who can support you, because there's a lot of us out here doing this work. And so now I'm really excited. We're going to move into anecdotes from growers. This is so important because California apple orchards are diverse. There's different microclimates, approaches, some are organic, some are conventional, different soils, different markets, and so on. So growers have been adapting these management strategies in really site-specific ways. And, in my personal opinion, real-world experiential knowledge is absolutely priceless. So, to start the conversation, I just want to invite everyone listening to think about which strategies for orchard health you really want to hear most about from these experienced apple growers. And please just take a moment, think about it, and put your top priorities in the chat. And as you're doing that, I'm going to let the growers know that we just want to know your name, your orchard name and location, and then we would love to hear your top 2 or 3 tips for orchard health. So as soon as we start getting some input from the chat, I'm going to open it up to the grower panel, and we can look through the chat together and see what the big priorities are from the audience, and then we'll do some introductions. Pruning old trees, consistent harvest, how much mulch around trees. Yeah, battling scab, that's good. What varieties rootstocks are best for dryland farming? Okay, so I'm gonna let people put some more things in the chat. I think I'll just go ahead and hand it over. So let's see, we'll go alphabetical order. Let's start with Dave. Dave Hale, welcome. Will you please tell us your name, your orchard name and location, and some of your top tips for orchard health?
Okay. Make sure everybody can hear me. Very good. My farm is located just north of Sebastopol, about 1 mile. I've been farming apples since 1978 and have a lot of experience doing it. So I guess a lot of what I could respond to would be specific questions on growing the trees from start to finish.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Okay, Stan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, Stan Devoto. I've been farming up on Gold Ridge Road since 1976. Issues with farming. I think the biggest issue that I have farming organic apples, by the way, I made the transition to organic farming in about 2007. I'm literally surrounded by orchards that are not being taken care of. Consequently, I'm getting all their fungal diseases blown in, and especially codling moth, which is very, very difficult to control organically, especially in my situation. For instance, we check like Dave, we check our traps every single day, our codling moth traps. When you have 7 or more codling moth per trap, you have an infestation. We've gotten as many as 72, constantly in the 40s. So Unfortunately, the sprays that we use organically have a residual of maybe 2 to 3 days. That's Dipel. We use Grandivo. We use a product, spinosad, called Entrust, and that has a 7-day residual. So I'm going to say the biggest problem we're having is with our neighbors. Everything's blowing into our property. We're in a real windy area, and trying to grow clean apples organically, it's a real challenge. You got to be very, very proactive, and you have to be willing to be on that sprayer, maybe every 2 weeks, every 2.5 weeks, or as need be.
Thanks. Ed, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Ted Richardson. Our orchard is in Occidental. We've been here 24 years. I've been farming apples since '89 on another farm. But this orchard is 2 acres up on a ridge overlooking the coast. Bella Ridge Farm is the name. And I guess the couple tips I would have for anyone is build your soil organic matter. Also, thin is what I always talk about. Walk through the orchard as often as you can, taking off damaged fruit, and thinning for quality and for return bloom, spending a lot of time on and flavor, making sure you thin your apples well, which is hand thinning and costly.
Thanks. Okay, I'm gonna start at the top of the chat because we have a lot of great input. Thank you, everyone. So, and I think I'm gonna start with this question from Tamar, and I know this, I get this question a lot. So, how do we keep old trees healthy if they've not been well maintained? You know, like Stan, you mentioned there are some orchards out there that are just not being cared for. If someone wanted to, you know, they have this orchard, it hasn't been taken care of, they want to start, you know, do you have suggestions for where people can start? And the next question is related, and it's what are your suggestions for pruning old trees, you know? So any thoughts on that from anyone?
What I would do, I think what I would do is I'd start by at least pruning, at least, and possibly fertilizing. Um, Basically, what we do with our existing orchards, we put on about 65 pounds of actual nitrogen per acre, which isn't much. You figure if we're using a 6% nitrogen chicken manure, pelleted chicken manure, we're only putting 1,000 pounds per acre, which isn't that much. But that's how I would start out, by at least pruning and building up the organic matter in the soil, possibly do a cover crop. We do bell beans when we can, and actually we get quite a bit of nitrogen just by doing bell beans.
I'll echo that. The most important thing you can do to an older tree is to prune it, not severely the first time around. Take notes and monitor what happens to it. Lightly fertilize it. The following year, you should be looking for 2 to 4 feet of new growth where you've made pruning cuts. If you're getting the 2 to 4 feet of new growth, that indicates that your roots are healthy and your tree is uptaking nutrient. If you're not getting the 2 to 4 feet of new growth, you've got a problem in your root zone. It might be time for that tree to be removed.
Ed, any thoughts?
I think I'd echo what Stan says about, and Dave, about pruning. It used to be the old saying was you could prune apple trees every other year, but I think the importance is every year. And more importantly, creating all the space within the tree, airspace for light. The old cliche is you're farming light when with fruit trees. So creating that space, less fungal problems, less issues, disease-wise. We live in a very foggy summer area, and so we've experienced diseases like sooty blotch that comes from days of fog that a lot of people haven't seen, and then certainly apple scab is a major disease that can be prevented or can be helped by good pruning practices.
Awesome. Thanks. That's great. Okay, I'm gonna look at the chat. Curious about how much mulch around the trees or reduce plant competition when establishing an orchard. So I think this question is about like how much mulch is enough or too much. You know, what kind of we could go maybe by thickness. Like I'm thinking maybe like an inch or two. Probably don't want to go more than that. What do you guys think?
I'll go.
Okay, thanks.
I think it's real challenging to mulch trees. On a small scale, it's great. I think with an acre or less, sure, you could do it. One of the proponents of mulching, Michael Phillips, used to say an apple grower is random, haphazard mulching. So you basically get through the orchard as you can and you mulch certain trees. Certainly does help. There's plenty of studies that show an inch of wood chips not near the trunk is very helpful, not incorporated just on top.
Cool, thanks. Curious what other growers are using to battle scab.
Scab's a tough one too. What we use, we start out, basically we start out our spray program, organic spray program. We come normally in sometime in March with a little bit of oil and copper. And then at pink stage, when the blossoms are just starting to open, they're still pink. We call it popcorn. We come in with a heavy dose of lime and sulfur, which theoretically would protect us for 7 to 10 days. If we don't have any rain after that, we don't do anything. If we do have rain in the forecast, we come in with about half the amount of lime sulfur, 2.5 gallons an acre, and we add about 5 pounds of wettable sulfur. If the weather's warm, we do not use sulfur. We use biofungicides. You can use Serenade, Regalia. They're all good biofungicides. If we do have an issue with rain, and if there is scab spores out there, we'll come in with oxidate, which actually is hydrogen peroxide, and it doesn't protect, it just eradicates any spores that might be out there. And I've been very successful with that. Yeah.
My experience with apple scab is frequency. There's a number of products out there that are very effective in controlling it. The key is to be proactive about it. If it's going to rain, get your crop protectants on just prior to the rain or immediately after the rain. And the whole key is being frequent application during the infection period. And all of that materials will do the job for you.
And what that means, Dave's saying, is that normally till about the middle of first week in May, second week in May, is when you got to be very proactive with your fungicide sprays. You can't take the attitude, oh, the wind's blown, everything's dried. It doesn't work that way. You got to be very aggressive. And like I said, again, proactive with your fungicide sprays.
I'll add one of the things on a smaller scale. We only have 2 acres, and UC studies have demonstrated that the leaves, by flipping the leaves and by spreading lime and fresh compost on the decomposing leaves, you speed up the process. You've reduced a whole lot of inoculum. So one of the things I'm doing right now is weed whacking leaves, spreading lime to help break down the leaves as fast as I can. Probably should have done that 3 weeks ago. But anyway, that's one other strategy to just reduce the spores count.
Awesome, thanks. I'm learning so much right now. This is great. I definitely will be looking back at this recording later. Okay, so another question, what varieties or rootstocks are best for dryland farming? And I would expand that too and say, do you have suggestions for ones that are just generally drought tolerant?
I'll go with that. From experience, I've in the past, the farm advisors have all encouraged dwarf rootstock, semi-dwarf rootstock, M26, M7, M111, which is a good rootstock. If it's planted in a dry area, it can't handle wet feed in the springtime. For my situation, the absolute best rootstock that I have found has been the old-fashioned seedling rootstock. There's another one called Antonovka. It's a Russian rootstock, and it's very, very drought tolerant. Now, the disadvantage of these vigorous rootstocks is that it might be another year or so before you have fruit. They bear a little bit later, but I think with the warm summers that we've been having, they're able to handle long periods of dry weather more effectively than the semi-dwarfs and dwarfs rootstocks. If I had water, I would probably plant some 111, but unfortunately, we have to dry farm almost all our orchards. Yeah.
I'll go next. I have trees that are on M7. I have trees that are on M111. Trees that are on Bud 118. I have trees that are on Antonovka, and I have trees that are on seedling. Hands down, the best response from the rootstock are the seedling trees. The growth is much faster. The roots go much deeper. And if you're dry farming, you want your roots to get down into the deep into the soil where there is moisture. So hands down, seedling rootstock would be the best, in my opinion.
I don't have much to say more than they said it. They said it all as far as drought. All our trees are on 111 and 7, M7. Some dwarfing ones, one a Bud 9 and M9, but I put water on every year. So
Okay, awesome, thanks. And yeah, I think I see some questions kind of around water management. Someone would like more information on dry farming, soil moisture monitoring. Any comments on any of that? How you do, if you're going to irrigate, how you make those decisions?
I'm not sure of the question.
Oh, sorry. So irrigation, water management, soil moisture monitoring, does anyone use any kind of moisture sensors or how do you decide, okay, it's time to irrigate. I'm going to irrigate now.
You guys want to go?
I don't
Oh, dry
irrigate, so I
you're dry
can't.
farming. I'm the one watering.
I think it's you, Ted. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically I start watering. This year we'll get 60 inches of rain. So I don't typically start watering, but I have a year-round cover in the orchard. I usually start the irrigation mid-June. And at that point, the trees get daily water. They get about 2 gallons of water a day. As I get closer to harvest, I start shutting the water back some as I taste the fruit. But this orchard's interplanted with Asian pears that need a lot of water, and apples and other European pears. So yeah, the water begins mid-June and continues all the way into the fall with some cut back near harvest.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah, someone mentioned they do that too in the chat. We have a great question from Calf. If there's time, and I'm gonna say we should just do this now because it's here in the chat. What are the primary regulatory challenges you face as apple producers? Anyone want to go?
Dave?
There's a list of them, and every time you have a new regulation that comes out, whether it's on your labor supply, on your chemical usage, on your air quality, burning brush, or your vehicles that you're using, every time it comes out, if there's a cost associated with us, it's detrimental to our bottom line. And there's a whole list of them.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend anyone, CAF folks, feel free to follow up, with Dave on that. Dave, if you're okay with that, because I know you've talked to me about this. So yeah, Dave's perspective is great on this. I'll just leave it at that. Anyone else have other thoughts?
I'd like to talk about labor laws now. In agriculture, during harvest time, we would be working 10-hour days, 6 days a week. Unfortunately, the rules now say that we have to pay overtime any more than 8 hours a day or 40 hours a week. And agriculture doesn't work that way. To give you an example, we also raise cut flowers and we raise a few wine grapes. So we have to weed. We weed with a hoe, we weed with tractors. And I have to pay, if I pay overtime, it's costing me just about $47 an hour for somebody to do weeds. So that aspect of the government getting involved really bothers me. They really don't have a clue about how to run a business or a farm. And making this rule about the 40-hour week in agriculture has really hurt a lot of growers.
Thanks for sharing that. Ed, do you have any thoughts?
Not really. I'm small scale enough. I can avoid some of that since I do almost all the work myself.
Okay. I'm going to jump back into the chat. We've got questions about beneficial insects and birds. Are there ways that you promote these?
Yes, I'll talk about that. One of the first things we tried to do here from the beginning is have something in bloom year round. And so we've reached that goal. So there's constantly something from January through the year in bloom. So we see a lot, like right now, even fennel and brassicas are in bloom. So we see beneficial insects throughout the orchard. The understory is always a living root. So that's happening as well. And then as far as birds, they can be very pesky during the harvest season, but the rest of the year you can find trees with woodpecker holes in them, which are eating codling moth larvae. And we have resident hawks that hunt for gophers.
Nice. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to jump back in the chat. Nutrient management in clay or other difficult soils. Does anyone have clay soil or challenging soil that they could talk about? Nope. Oh, that's great. You all have great soil. I'm glad to hear it. That's good. Margaret, feel free to follow up with me about that. I can put my email in the chat. I can send you some things if you'd like. We have a question about fire. So Sharon says we are in a very high fire hazard area. What can we use instead of wood chips for mulch that is less flammable? Does anyone have thoughts on that?
I'd say compost.
I would say grow a cover crop and just mow it down.
Mm-hmm.
And that way you're creating your own mulch from your own property and you're not bringing a product in.
I would say incorporate some cultivation into your landscape as well. If you cultivate 1/3 of your property, there's 1/3 less chance of a fire hazard breaking out with dry material on the ground.
Yeah.
Try to mitigate it as much as you can.
Thanks. Okay. What do we do when you see a neighboring orchard that is totally neglected? 100 trees, no maintenance, huge amount of waste and disease. If you remove a tree, what do you do with oh, that's a separate question. Okay, so yeah, any tips just for talking to your neighbors? Like, have you guys done that, or what's your approach? How do you start that conversation with a neighbor?
That's a hard decision. That's a hard talk to have because what a neighbor does on his own property basically is his right. Yeah. You hate to force somebody to do something on his property that he doesn't want to do. On the other hand, it does affect us adversely. I've heard years ago the county would come in and actually spray that orchard and charge the owner. But that would never fly nowadays.
Well, I talk to all my neighbors now that have apple trees, and so I've even got multiple neighbors picking up codling moth stings off the ground and off the trees. And so these are folks with only a handful of trees. I'm not experiencing what Dave and Stan experience, but talking to the neighbors about it, they all seem receptive.
We're in a situation now where most of our neighbors don't have apple trees. We're surrounded by vineyards.
Yeah.
Um, um, the vineyards are well maintained, and they have a pest control program in place already. So our impact is a lot less, I think, from disease pressures because of that.
I'm wondering from the, cooperative extension side of things, I'm wondering with like a simple fact sheet or like visual, of like, this is what codling moth looks like. Here's what you can do about it. Would some kind of handout, do you think, help apple growers who want to start conversations with neighbors just to have like a simple, straightforward educational resource? Would that be useful? Because that's something I could work on. Okay, see, Ted's not.
I think you could do that as well as, I mean, a lot of these people have a feeling about these old trees like they need to keep them and a nostalgic. But younger trees or something new, a different planting, even a beneficial insectary, those are great things that people can do with their land. Um, and these old trees are clearly some of them need to go.
Okay, yeah, I hear that a lot for sure.
I see one question.
Yeah.
Wendy asked or commented on when I had a larger farm, 14-acre farm, I did go into the neighbors, ask permission to go into the neighbors and hang pheromones to extend the boundary
Mhm.
for codling moth, and they were all receptive. It meant I spent some money on that, but I extended the 14-acre boundary to a much larger buffer.
Got it. Awesome. Yeah, if you see questions in the chat you'd like to answer, feel free to do that too. Um, we also have questions in the Q&A as well. I think you guys can see that, but I'm just going to keep looking at the chat for now. Okay, so another question for Ted from Tamar. Weed whacking leaves and applying lime. Do you mean tree foliage or nearby plants on the ground?
The old leaves from last year. So as soon as they fall, and for here, because we're in a low chill area, it takes into January for all the leaves to fall. As soon as they're on the ground, start whacking them or raking them out from under the trees. So basically, weed whacking the last year's leaves that are decaying to speed up decomposition.
Nice. Okay. And actually, Laura has a follow-up question about that too for you, Ted.
I
She said,
saw that.
okay, great.
I've never heard that. You can't spread lime and compost at the same time. In fact, I've heard add lime to compost piles. So
Yeah.
that's something new to me. And I don't do it exactly at the same time. First, I do the lime, and then I come in a couple weeks later with the compost.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've heard the same. Question for Dave. Where do you get the seedling stock? And does it matter what varietals the seed is from?
Seedling rootstocks available through Trico. If you have a small orchard, you can look for the variety that you want and just see if you can find it on Seedling. Urban Tree Farm would be a source, possibly Harmony Farm Supply. If you order rootstock from Trico or in Oregon, I think the minimum order is 50 rootstocks, which might be a little overwhelming for the backyard orchardist. They are available.
Dave, Trico does not do any seedling rootstock anymore. So they do all the clonal rootstocks. I found good rootstock from Willamette Nursery. They do the Antonovka, which is a hardy seedling, and they do the old-fashioned apple seedling also. Willamette Nursery.
I'm gonna jump over to the Q&A for now. So we have a question. What is the best mulch for around the base of a tree? I'm guessing they're talking maybe about like wood chip mulch. This was from an anonymous person, so I'm not sure who. And it sounds like maybe we kind of cover that. We don't really want to,
Still,
probably can't mulch a huge orchard, but maybe here and there.
I would still go with wood chips. The idea of small branches, ramial wood chips. You can look that up, and compost. I'd go with compost too. As much as you can mulch with compost, I think you're helping.
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna move into Calf's question now in the Q&A, which is a huge topic, and I'd love to hear from each of you on this specifically. So, what has been the most successful for codling moth management for each of you? I'd love to hear from all of you on that.
Who's gonna go?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think so much of it depends on the setting. So it's such a broad topic. I mean, we're somewhat isolated. We're not like Stan and Dave, especially Stan, surrounded by orchards. We're somewhat isolated. We do have codling moth flights from neighbors' trees. I'm convinced of that. But I think people need to assess their level of what they're willing to risk. And so for me, I've been using the pheromones for almost 20 years. And I've switched to the puffers, which is a little easier to apply the last 3 years or 4 years. And most years it's under 5% with that. I also do some sprays of Sid-X, which is the codling moth virus. I also release trichogramma wasp, which is another $100 an acre. So between all those things, I'm spending some money for sure. But I think most years the damage is under 5%. Last year it peaked over 20, and I'm still trying to figure out why.
No,
Uh, I found that organically, for me, the best product that we've used has been Entrust. It has a residual of about 7 days. The downside is it's very, very expensive. I've tried Grandivo. It's been okay. And like Ted, I probably had over 20% strikes this year from codling moth, which really isn't acceptable. This year, I'm going to try Sid-X also, in addition to Entrust and Grandivo. Yeah.
And my control system, we had less than a 0.5% damage in our late apples last year. All through the season, we were less than 0.5% codling moth damage. And we intensively monitor for the pest. And when they're active, a chemical application is made, timed at egg hatch to disrupt their life cycle. And I've been very successful with it the last 5 years with minimal damage. And that's the approach that we have taken.
Okay, thanks everyone. There's another question in the chat that I get asked a lot and I think is on a lot of people's minds in our region. So with Manzana leaving, what is the future of apples in Sonoma County? Do you have any thoughts on that? I don't know if anyone has really the answer to that, but does anyone have any thoughts or reflections on that change? I think most of you are primarily fresh market, is that right? But maybe you all
Yes.
do process some too.
I'll start. We're not in a Manzana market. We have diversed away from that arena, and we have a fairly solid customer base. So I'm thinking that Manzana is not going to adversely affect us one way or the other. The people that rely on Manzana for a home for their fruit are the ones that are going to be hurt the most by this. We're going to roll with what gets thrown at us. If our sales drop, they drop. And we're just going to try to maintain what we're currently doing.
Thanks, Dave. And I realized, since this is a statewide conference, I should just briefly mention Manzana is a large apple processor in Sonoma County. That's what we're talking about. And they will be leaving the county fully within, I believe, 5 years. So that's the context. Anyone else have thoughts?
We're all fresh pack.
Okay.
We're also fresh pack. I did work with Manzana up till about 7 or 8 years ago, and then financially, it just wasn't worth it. Processing apples, uh, uh, basically, it might cover the cost of your picking and hauling costs, the amount they pay. And that's why a lot of the orchards in the county or in the state they're in, growers can't afford, who are processor growers, they can't afford to farm them effectively.
Thanks. Yeah, while we're on the subject, any other thoughts or tips on the economic side of things for, management that come to mind that you feel are important that you'd want other apple growers to think about, from the economic side?
It's real hard to compete with Washington apple prices. I think everyone knows that. So a plug out to education and get people to support local apples, I think is constant, and Slow Food's done a good job with that. A shout out to them and farmers markets. Certainly we all do farmers markets. That's been a shout out, loyal customers. Diversity of varieties is a key, I think, to maintain kind of that interest in apples. Stay away from this certain handful. So, yeah.
Thanks. Any other economic tips or marketing tips?
Yeah, I'll jump on that. If you're small and you're starting out, you want to avoid the commodity market as much as you can. And the commodity market would be your wholesale houses, um, uh, retail, the stores. Very difficult to enter that arena and be successful. The commodity pricing. Some of those bigger houses up in Washington work on $1 a box profit margin, and the average small farmer can't live on $1 a box profit. And when you're a big shed and you're pumping 2 million boxes a year, $1 a box is big money for you. So again, avoid the commodity markets. Concentrate on a customer base that's going to support you and give you a return on your time.
My advice is stay small. Don't get large to where you have to hire out all your help. I mean, obviously, both Dave and I have to hire out help to prune, to thin. I have to hire help out to do farm markets. But the amount we make from farm markets, retail, it's 20 times more than what the processors will pay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing all that. It's super helpful. I see Paige in the chat. She's saying, I would love to support these farmers. I buy 250 pounds of apples a week for my school. Would they be open to selling to a school in Nevada City?
We've had a great, I'm a member of Feed, Stan and I are members of Feed Co-op. We've had a great response from the schools the last 2 years, Sonoma County schools. Seems like the demand is increasing each year, and so that's exciting. So through Feed Sonoma, yes, you could buy the apples. I suppose you could buy them direct, right, Stan?
You could buy them direct, but the issue is we're so busy harvesting, taking care of business that we need a company like our co-op, like Feed, to do the distribution. And believe me, they are not making their markup is very, very minimal compared to other wholesalers and jobbers. Yeah.
Can you, for anyone who doesn't know what Feed Cooperative is, can you just briefly tell us about that and why you like working with them?
Okay, I'll go. So Feed is a farmer-owned co-op in the last 3 years. The first one in the state, is my understanding. There are now more. A food hub, where we have 4 trucks that distribute throughout the Bay Area. Um, we have a great sales team and manager and purchasing and a great staff all around warehouse. It's just a feel good operation. Farmer owned. There's about 35 of us that are owners. Started as a private business by Tim Page, who's a legend. And it's just been a pleasure to work with them and support the group.
Yeah, so I would say, Paige, if you want to reach out to Feed Cooperative, that could be a really interesting conversation and just see, if you're able to buy local apples from these growers through Feed. Might be some potential there. I see one more question from Colleen. I know we're getting close to time here. When you thin, what do you do with the thinned apples?
When we thin, we throw them on the ground.
That's a consistent practice. We've done it for decades.
The first thinning is always on the ground for us, and then the subsequent thinnings, beginning in June, are with a bag, and any visible codling moth stings go in the bag. The others go on the ground. It's pretty simple to see the stings that's the subsequent thinnings that go all the way up until August.
Okay, another question in the Q&A. Sandy asks, dumb question, but is lime on the organically approved list? Our orchard is not organic, but working toward it.
Yes, lime is. There's oyster shell, there's Blue Mountain lime. Lime's been on it for a long time, yes.
Cool, thanks. I see another question about wood chips in the Q&A. I think we've kind of covered that. Wood chip mulch versus a compost mulch blend. Any preferences there? I mean, in my mind, adding in a little compost probably couldn't hurt. Seems like a good idea if you can. Might be more expensive. Any thoughts on that?
What was the question?
Jennifer in the Q&A is asking, would it be better to use avocado wood chips as mulch or better to use a mulch compost blend? A soils business.
I think you could be both. You could do both. Certainly organic matter applied in the orchard is a great thing.
And one more question before we wrap up from Laura in the chat. If you collect the thin apples with codling strikes, what do you do to get rid of them and kill the larvae?
They get sealed up in plastic bags until I'm convinced they're no longer viable, and then dumped. If the compost pile is hot enough, when I get it up hot enough, I'll put them in there as well.
Yeah, composting, I think.
And then, yeah, sometimes we feed them to the cows next door. But I never trust that completely because the cows might not eat all of them.
Good point. Okay, any concluding thoughts or closing thoughts? Things you want to make sure people really know or remember, take-home messages. Dave, I have be proactive seared in my mind from all of our conversations. So that's my take home from you every time we talk. And I appreciate that.
Well, the whole thing about apple farming is it's start to finish. It starts in January, and that starts with pruning and care of the trees. And you go all the way up until October, November when you finish harvest. And the more you can do yourself, the more input you put in, the better your fruit is going to be. Probably the worst thing you can do for apples is neglect. So be proactive about it. Enjoy what you're getting out of them. Some of the varieties that we grow, the flavors are off the chart, and it's well worth the time that goes into them for the end result.
Very well said. Anyone else?
I would agree with Dave, and Stan's been doing this, both of them, for a long time. The varieties, there's so many good varieties. It's really, we grow over 50 on the farm. And in the last few years, I've sawed down gotten rid of at least 10 or 15 that I didn't want to grow. So that didn't meet the quality standard, but there's so many good apples.
And the good thing about varieties you don't like, you can cut the tree down and you obviously can graft on a variety that just might work. And in essence, you're losing 2 years of production, and that's it.
Yeah, I know you did that with Gold Rush, Stan, which is my personal favorite apple. This is just me personally. But man, I love Gold Rush, and it was really fun to see that you're doing that, grafting that on. Any other favorite varieties, or do you want to just shout out real quick?
Probably at the top of the pyramid, if apples were a pyramid, at the top would be Ashmead's kernel. It's just a marvelous piece of fruit. It's a russet that originated in the UK back in the 17th century or 1700s. And the flavor profile is off the chart. It's probably one of the most sought after apples on the farm.
I tend to agree with Dave. Ashmeads are just a great apple. If you like a tart apple, another favorite of mine is Belle de Bosco. Unfortunately, it's a very large apple. It tends to bitter pit. It grows so fast. But flavor-wise and tartness and crispness, it can't be beat. Yeah, that's a really good one.
Guess the new favorite at farmers markets the last 3 years has been Mutsu. It's now on my top three. Everyone tastes Mutsu, is just static with it. But we can't sell enough, even wholesale.
Nice. Okay, and last thing this time, for real, I know we're at 12:48. We're supposed to end 3 minutes ago, but just real quick, tell us where we can buy your apples. Let's just go around. What farmers markets are you at? I know you're with Feed, but where can we buy your apples?
Okay, our apples are at the Napa Farm Market, the Ferry Building, the San Rafael Market, and the St. Helena Farm Market.
My apples are available during harvest season at the farm. We're open daily. And then we do 3 farmers markets a week: San Rafael Sundays and Thursdays, and Hayward on Saturday.
We are at the original Santa Rosa Farmers Market on Saturday, most years, not every year, depending on the crop, Saturday morning at the LBC. And then on Sunday in Sebastopol, usually for 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes 10 weeks. And that's it. And then Feed Sonoma is the other outlet. So buy a feed box and then you get these great apples all through the year. Sign up for a subscription through Feed. That's one great way to do it.
Yeah, can confirm. Okay, thank you all so much. Evan, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to say to wrap up, but I think we're pretty much done. Thank you everyone so much for listening. I will send links to all of these 3 different farms along with all the links from my presentation. So thank you all so much for your expertise and your time and your hard work and your dedication to apples and our region, our local food system.
Thank you.